La 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 la.
Oh no! No!
No!
No!
La 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 la. Bye.
Bye bye.
Hey and welcome. I'm Hammeh, and with the issue of players' behaviour within Overwatch and toxicity or not within the community, as well as what we can do to help it, coming up again this week, with noted streamers having their accounts banned for doing Bronze to GM challenges, and players with over 2,000 reports on an account actually seeing their accounts banned, the topic of how Blizzard is addressing both toxic players and more undesirable general behaviour in Overwatch is a hot button one right now. There's a lot of debate around what the community can do and what Blizzard could do or should be doing perhaps to address this. Yesterday we had a dev update from the Overwatch team on playing nice and playing fair, which answers some questions on the team's views on the current perception of toxic behaviour and challenging behaviour in Overwatch, but for me it left some other questions being asked as well. There was loads of great stuff in there, I'll be honest, but some of it didn't quite sit right with me, so here's a quick summary of what was discussed, a bit of a run through and analysis by me on what was mentioned, but also what I thought was kind of left out in the discussion, as well as a question for you. What is the largest cause of frustration for you in Overwatch matches? Is it trolls, or people frustrated by the game situation that they find themselves in, and how could that be changed? Timecode's in the description below if you'd like to skip. Okay, so first the dev update. Now you can go see this over on the Play Overwatch channel, but here's a real quick summary. Jeff mentioned things about what people perceived as a rising tide of bad behaviour, and he started outlining what Blizzard are going to do and have done about it, mentioning console reporting being implemented. He did mention that 20,000 emails had been sent to people saying that their reports had resulted in action against someone, and that they'd prefer these to be in-game notifications in future. In terms of disciplinary action, there were some stats, which we'll go through later. 480,000 accounts have had action against them, with 340,000 from reports. Now, that sounds good, but we need to consider how those numbers are in context. Now, as I said in the intro here, the dev update video made a lot of fair points. Jeff did say there is no magic bullet, patch or update or change that can magically remove toxic or frustrated behaviour, and that the team are dedicated to making improvements. They'll be doing some things that are visible and some things that are not, and I think that's totally fair. We can see a lot of improvements that have been made already, even since Season 5, that I'll talk about in a bit. There were a few bits that, perhaps in the context or with things that weren't mentioned in the update, didn't quite sit right with me in the way that they were presented, and these were primarily around a few points made about how the team is trying to prioritise doing different things, but is finding that it has to spend a lot of time in terms of time and resources punishing people or creating these systems in order to moderate behaviour. And then Jeff also talking about what the community can do and it taking responsibility for its part in creating a great gaming environment. So before I get into my feelings on that, first things first, I want to say thank you for this video, Blizzard. 2 months ago, a lot of people were feeling blues at Season 5. I made a video about it where I talked about where my personal sample size of one feeling was from and what could potentially be done to change things in a variety of different areas. Now, there was a general feeling in the community at that point of time, and things are happening very, very quickly, and that is great. As always, Blizzard are listening, and I really want to acknowledge that before going through a few thoughts and questions. So if I'm happy that Blizzard have released this video, then what's the problem, Hammeh? Well, I came away from it feeling that although I understand why it was created, I felt that part of the point has been missed, and then if it's taken very literally by some people in the community, then there's a danger that the focus will switch to what are perceived as the toxic, the trolling players too much, rather than some of what could be underlying frustrations that cause some frustrated behaviour in the first place. Now, before I go on, please do know that I'm trying to make a distinction here between someone who's intentionally trolling, intentionally being toxic, intentionally trying to ruin games, against people who are competitive, who perhaps get frustrated when games don't go their way, who perhaps could do a better job of controlling their emotions and anger or frustration, but who will come out with things that perhaps cause frustration or toxic atmospheres from time to time. I appreciate that Blizzard want to reassure the community and that this is what this video is for. People have felt bad about things. Blizzard want to show that they're taking action that's meaningful, and they can only discuss this issue so much and in so many different ways. But it felt to me that the update didn't address a key driver of baseline competitive Overwatch frustration and Overwatch bad feeling in matches, and that is the feeling and perception of how the current matchmaking in the competitive system actually works. So latent frustration at the matchmaking system and the SR gain system has been kicking around for at least a season or so, if not a bit longer. And I'd probably say there's just as much, if not more, underlying frustration resulting in, I'd say, everyday stupid playing competitive, the sod it, I'll try a new hero mentality, this this game might not be going anywhere, as the active idiots who decide to derank or to troll or to flame people intentionally to try and get a rise out of them. Now, on the SR piece, Blizzard are doing things to address this and several other different things, but none of this was mentioned in the update video. Attempted SR manipulation, the people with less than 50% win rates, people trying to one trick and trying to climb, has apparently been addressed or is in the process of being tweaked. This was dropped into the blog for Season 6 Competitive as a paragraph. These changes should help address some of the anomalies players have been reporting, especially with heroes with lower win rates. Now, Blizzard hardly talked about this perception or reality at all in Season 5, bar a couple of quiet mentions, and I understand why. They couldn't confirm it to be true if it was without drawing more attention to it and driving more of the unwanted behaviour. There were enough people who you could see in their play histories playing loads of Mercy out of nowhere in Season 5, even though they hadn't in the previous seasons, or at least in my experience of play. If Blizzard said there was a problem, then more people would try to exploit it, and that would make match quality that much worse. Ditto for exploits. There are just some things that Blizzard can't talk about because they don't want to draw attention to them until they fix them. Now, I get that. It makes perfect sense. It is done for the right reasons. But when the SR piece was referred to as anomalies that people were reporting in the Season 5 blog, that's kind of frustrating to me alongside the tone of some of this developer update. So going back to the list of fair points and challenging points, well, the challenging points, one of them stood out for me. If you're a bad person doing bad things, we don't want you in Overwatch. Now that is perfectly good as a goal, perfectly laudable. My question would be, is that the tip of the iceberg? Are more Overwatch games feeling bad because of these people who are trolling and doing very specifically bad things, or because of people in a general sense who are reacting and getting frustrated in different ways, perhaps due to frustration at a lack of progress, whether that be due to what they perceive as being a system problem, or maybe it's a personal performance thing. Now, I was additionally a little bit concerned when this was kind of mixed in with a message on community self-reflection. Now, Jeff and the developer update said a bunch of great things. The community can be more positive and spread positivity rather than being negative. Absolutely. Overwatch team want to build game systems to help that. That's absolutely great. And the community can absolutely take responsibility for their part, for our part, in terms of creating a better game space and environment to play. No arguments there at all. There was then a bit that came in that was a bit weird though. It was saying that the developers want to make new maps, heroes and shorts, but they're put in a weird position of spending a tremendous amount of time and resources punishing people. An example was cited as rather making, say, a match history system than doing reporting people in console, but the exact same team was rerouted to work from one on the other. And the quote that bad behaviour is not only ruining the experience, but making the game progress in terms of development as a much slower rate. Now, that's a very candid, honest piece of almost, frustrated feedback in one ways there. And if I was working on Overwatch, I would be frustrated by this too, so I completely understand it. But my kind of question from it is, to the community in a supportive way, like, why can we just stop this? But also to the Overwatch team, and it probably is not easy to quantify, we can see that you're taking a bunch of action against these bad egg players, and that is brilliant. But for the mid to long-term health of Overwatch, can we have something to do with matchmaking? It feels as though that there's this base level of frustration in the competitive game right now, in terms of playing in ladder within game in competitive mode, that somewhat seems to stem from the perception of match quality. And the factors that I feel weigh into that, I'll talk about in a second. So in terms of the Overwatch community, we're pretty lucky to be able to have these frequency of updates and also the candidness and sort of sometimes the honesty and rawness of them. So we should appreciate that. This is by no means me axing the updates or Jeff or shooting the messenger here. My feeling coming out of this update was it is absolutely fine, and we as a community should take responsibility for our part in trying to make things more positive. I, for example, can do that. I will sit there at the end of the game, and sometimes, having asked someone to switch in a game earlier in the game and then they didn't, I get really tempted at the end of the game to say, you said you'd switch ages ago and you didn't. And hey, I played in games where I said I'll switch off Symmetra if we're having problems. And then I get into this mind funk occasionally where it's like, well, no one else in my team is doing anything. This game is pretty much not going to work, so I'm just going to continue and have fun myself. So you can see almost my own hypocrisy here on both sides of things. I, as a community member, I'm sure could do a lot better on both of those sides. And we all have those little moments of frustration. There was a particular piece where Jeff said, because we're spending a lot of the time addressing these things, you can't have nice new things like new maps, new heroes and new shorts. They're the things that the team want to be working on. And that, due to the omission of to do with things around other causes apart from these bad Apple players, that frustrated me a little bit. Hell, I'm a lore and story fan. I love the Overwatch world and game. I'm never going to be an Overwatch pro, and I want all of those things that Blizzard are talking about. But there are other underlying factors to do with this sort of base level of community frustration, I think, with the competitive experience that might be important for the mid to long term health of Overwatch. These 400,000 accounts with action taken against them and going after these people who are very, very obvious in terms of making an Overwatch match feel bad by their presence is absolutely a good and right thing to do, reassuring the community and showing that action is being taken, because Blizzard are working hard on this and they're doing lots of stuff. The dev update just left me asking, philosophically, where do you put your resources if you're Blizzard? I mean, look at all of the investment in the Overwatch League that's going to be launching later this year. This is encouraging and inspiring people to compete in Overwatch as a top level of competition. It feels that if we can help Blizzard invest more time in the grassroots, which is the actual competitive in-game ladder matchmaking, then it smooths out that route and it's sort of investing in the lower grassroots of the game so that people want to try and aspire to play in the higher routes of the game. If people have a horrible experience in their average day-to-day ladder, how do they take the next step? A lot of people aren't going to jump from just playing a little bit of quick play to trying to play in a private match and scrim, for example. So in conclusion, please, Blizzard, please invest your time in finding ways to water the roots of Overwatch competitive and deal with the things that perhaps cause this level of frustration, and don't spend too much time pruning the very obvious leaves or the sort of results, the symptoms of some of this. I think that there is a point where idiots are going to always be idiots. They'll come, they'll get banned, they get acted on, and then they'll go. And what Blizzard is doing with the reporting system and reassuring us that that's happening is absolutely the right thing to deal with these people. If the system is working the best it can, then action is taken, the community is reassured, and people get on with their lives. But in the long term, if Overwatch is going to be a competitive, healthy game, if the help of the competitive game section of the game is a focus, then something needs to be done about matchmaking or giving players the agency, the ability to change their fates in game a little bit more. Now, why am I obsessing over this a little bit? I just feel there's this tie to baseline toxicity or competitive fatigue. My gut feeling, sample size me, one again, but anecdotally from teammates, so take it with a pinch of salt, is that match quality in general drives a lot of the everyday what's the point in me trying to play this game properly feeling. This competitive lethargy that in turn leads to people making stupid picks, that in turn leads to any toxicity or disagreement or lack of teamwork, that in turn leads to all of those reports being made in the first place. The reports being the symptom that Blizzard are having to, perhaps due to our sort of clamouring for it as a community, having to spend a lot of time dealing with rather than going after the causes. Now, whether the 400,000 odd accounts that have had action taken against them and what action that was are predominantly trolls or hackers or, let's say, things like racists or intentionally people trying to throw, or are a big bunch of them just frustrated individuals who have occasionally said the odd swear word or gone over the line from other reasons. It's not something you can tell from just the stat we've been given or even from reports necessarily. So I guess there's a part where the Overwatch team had taken this action in response to community feedback. I think it'd be great if we could try and support them to go after what perhaps are more sort of some of the root causes of frustration rather than addressing the things that are kind of the results, if that makes sense. What was missed a bit in the developer update is that solo queuing or competitive in Overwatch or small group queuing can be a frustrating experience, and you as a player have little agency or control in games with any systems over your fate right now. Sometimes I feel that in Overwatch you can see a match is a near write-off through no fault of your own before a match has even started, even though perhaps the matchmaker feels that it's a statistically fair match. There are situations that matchmaking just creates. Here's one. A group with lower levels and high levels, say silvers playing with platinums in, broadly speaking, a platinum SR level of game. That will trigger someone in turn to lock DPS. A game where you have 2 to 4, insert class, insert hero main, insert one tricks here. And I know that role-based queuing or hero-based queuing is something that would not work in Overwatch really very well because people need the ability to try and switch. Now, I know there are a lot of technical game design challenges to sort these things out and they can't be easy. Blizzard have explained why it's not easy before. But the way that the developer update was worded in places towards the end just sort of almost didn't address any of this at all. I completely appreciate that Jeff said something at the end of, this isn't a big guilt trip in terms of the community taking ownership of our own behaviour and what we can do. But there are things that positivity alone cannot address. Positivity can mitigate the bad effects of some of these situations that are created. They're painpoints, but positivity can't take the situations away in the first place. Now, there is only one thing you can do to try and mitigate these teammate frustrations in Overwatch at the moment, and it's the most powerful thing of all. If you group or stack. This is, and Blizzard have said before, Overwatch is a team game. In an ideal world, you're playing 6v6 in stacks and team, and the whole experience of solo queuing and duo queuing, like for any other game, whether it's a MOBA or anything else, introduces this random factor. Do you know what? If Blizzard said, we're not going to be making any kind of solo queue or group queue systems anytime anytime soon. Group up and get on with it. Go make friends. I'm sure people would be pretty frustrated, but at the same time we'd get over it and we'd know what the land was like. A small part of me wishes that Blizzard could maybe be bold in this sense and just say, right, this is a team game and we want to make it a team game. Say, for example, having a solo only or a 6-stack only clue. Either you're playing this on your own or you're playing it as a 6-stack. That's really bold stuff, but of course you can't keep everyone happy all of the time and you want to try and keep most of your players happy. So this is the question then of who is Overwatch balanced for, and opinions like mine that I've expressed here, other people's frustrations. Is it the opinions of a vocal minority? And for the general health of Overwatch, is that not what Blizzard want to balance for? Now that's a very tough one that we'll probably never get an answer to. In terms of pain points though, there still seem to be a couple of things in terms of agency, in terms of control, that could fit in between the solo queue or the full group experience. Can I have an option not to queue with anyone who's grouped below my SR level or band, or perhaps reducing the SR band that people can play with each other with in competitive? Assuming placement in MLMR systems work on average, people are in their rank for a reason. Now, I don't think a GM would want me, a diamond player, on their team, as they'd worry I probably might not be able to compete to their level, and do you know what? I understand that. These groups in competitive games immediately create imbalance and a little bit of toxicity and friction from the get-go, and I'd say the vast majority of the times I've experienced it, the higher level player may not be able to make up for the lower level player's performance. The larger the gap between them, the more obvious this is. If the high level player is a support main up to a particular level, then you can pretty much kiss the game goodbye, and that's not because they're a bad support, but their carry potential for that lower level player, particularly if the lower level player has to play tank or DPS. It's the kind of imbalance that's built in with this SR system banding, that you can play with players a certain amount of SR above or below you, but it immediately creates an imbalance in the matchmaker, and it feels like something that could be tightened a little bit or maybe removed so that people can still try and play together. But Blizzard could be bold and just say, look, you know, we want competitive, we want a diamond competitive game to be a diamond competitive experience. Now the debate will be a player experience one. Obviously Blizzard want people to be able to play with their friends, and I completely get that. And for longer matchmaking times, I would happily queue a couple of minutes more if I could avoid that kind of match. Ultimately I feel though it's what is the greater good? Are you prioritising the desires of the majority or the minority here? Who is the vocal minority? Do most people want to be able to queue with their friends with up to 1,000 SR difference? And if more people want that than don't in competitive, well then maybe that's what Blizzard should do. But it does create this mismatch in a game from the start. Another thing I've mentioned before is a potential solve, and this is agency in terms of helping players feel and helping players control their experience a little bit more. Give me the option to somehow avoid players on my own team in future. I don't care if that's a fixed amount of 10 players that I have to add and remove from a list. Maybe I can only ignore up to 10 players. It does add another layer to the matchmaking. I know that you'd have to wait longer to avoid being matched against these people. But this has been in the game in some form before. It was the avoid player function. Now, the Widowmaker example, which is often cited, there was a Widowmaker player when this system was live who had huge queue times because people avoided him because they didn't want to play against him, or with him perhaps because he was playing Widow. So that system didn't work, but it was there in some form to start with. Can't I just avoid players on my own team? Can I not just have a list? Can I not just use the avoid player system, but only for players on my own team, and perhaps with some caveats, like there's a fixed amount of times I can use it per day? Now there are plenty of times where I've delayed my queue to avoid playing with people and going and coming back, but just being able to have that agency, if there is someone I really, really dislike playing with, I'd love to be able to not play with them again, and I know that the odds are pretty low. But again, it gives that feeling of control, it gives that small piece of control, and if I have to queue for a couple of minutes longer, I would do that. I don't know about you guys, would you take a slightly longer queue time in exchange for a little bit more control like this? Now, as a final thought, to end on a positive note, we as a community, as the dev update said, can and absolutely should do more. As I said, I'm generally, when playing Overwatch, I'd like to think on balance, I'm pretty positive, but I have noticeably seen myself getting a little bit more salty and competitive over the last season in particular compared to previous seasons, Season 5. It probably came out in a couple of my videos. Personally, sample size 1, buyer beware, usual caveats apply. My reasons in Season 5 were kind of frustration at the meta, a bit of a personal lack of progression on my front. I got to Diamond and then slipped back a heck of a lot. The feeling of backsliding, and then also the general sort of, let's say, bad egg player feeling of Season 5, this smurfing, one tricks and bad behaviour kind of thing that's come out recently. Well, there's been a meta shift with Doomfist and similar tweaks, the Mercy changes. I'm very excited by that, should be very interesting for the game in general. The SR around your placements to address that feeling of backsliding, that's also been changed. Reporting systems being changed, actions being taken. Blizzard are definitely listening and working on improving things, and long may it continue. My hope, as I've said, just to summarise, is that we as a community don't get obsessed by the symptoms, these bad egg players, and that Blizzard don't get stuck, as has kind of been hinted in that developer update, in addressing the symptoms, rather than going after things that could be great improvements on the root cause of a majority of what might be day-to-day Overwatch frustration, rather than perhaps the exceptions, these bad players. What can we do as a community? Well, we can of course try and be more positive, we can try and turn the frowns upside down, give more praise, and as I said earlier, hold the tongue on when you'd normally make a negative comment. And personally, I sure as hell know I can do that. Maybe I can just sing at the beginning of matches more. Are you finding Season 6 more pleasant than last season? Do you experience any of this? What are your biggest bugbears in Overwatch? Do you feel that things have improved in the last few weeks? Am I just going a little bit stir crazy in my competitive salt pool? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers for tuning in. It has been a bit of a long opinion piece. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. And as always, check out all of my Overwatch lore and similar in these playlists here. Thanks for your patience over the last few weeks. I'm going to be ramping up my video production again. I know it's been a little quiet, but please do stick with me. We've got lore and lots of cool things, as well as new Sunday experiment videos. So keep an eye out for a few lore-y and non-Overwatchy things on Sundays. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.